The Barents Sea lies silent under a pale northern sky. It is August 2000, a brief season when the ice retreats, and the Russian Navy dares to breathe again. For the first time in almost a decade, a full-scale naval exercise is underway. 30 warships, 4 submarines, dozens of aircraft, all moving in a precise choreography meant to remind the world that Moscow still commands the Arctic. Among them glides a shadow larger than them all. The K-141 Kursk, a nuclear-powered giant, the pride of the Northern Fleet, and the last true symbol of Soviet engineering. Her double hull of hardened steel, her twin reactors, her crew of 118 men. Everything about her was built to project strength. To her commanders, she was unsinkable. To her sailors, she was home. On the morning of August 10th, the Kursk departs from the harbour of Vidyarevo, slipping beneath the grey waves with the slow confidence of something that has done this 1,000 times before. Her orders are simple: join the fleet's exercise Summer X, fire a pair of training torpedoes, and return to port within 3 days. Routine, predictable. Safe. Above, the cruiser Pyotr Veliki leads the surface formation. Smaller ships scatter around it like iron wolves circling their prey. Communications flow, coordinates align, the sea stays calm. It is the kind of day that almost makes sailors forget what this ocean can do. Inside the Kursk, the air hums with the mechanical pulse of turbines and the chatter of the crew. Men drink tea, check gauges, tighten bolts. Some write quick letters for delivery after the mission. The corridors smell of oil and steel. A few laugh. A few don't. They have no reason to suspect that within 48 hours, this same silence around them will become a grave. Outside, the water is perfectly still, a mirror for the grey clouds above. A seagull passes, then nothing. No sound, no movement, only the deep. If one could listen closely, beneath the hum of engines and the whisper of sonar, perhaps the sea itself is holding its breath. For now, everything is calm, but in the dark bow of the Kursk, inside one aging torpedo, a chemical reaction has already begun. Before disaster claimed her name, K-141 Kursk was the pride of Russia's Northern Fleet, the largest and most formidable submarine built in the post-Soviet era. At 154 meters long, she was almost the size of 2 football fields, and when fully submerged, weighed over 18,000 tons, heavier than most surface warships that sailed above her. Her twin nuclear reactors could drive her through the depths at over 30 knots, faster than any destroyer could chase. She carried 24 P-700 Granite cruise missiles, each capable of sinking an aircraft carrier, and a full complement of torpedoes for close-range combat. The Kursk belonged to the Arska, the second class, a breed of submarine designed not just to survive underwater, but to dominate it. She was built with 2 hulls, an outer steel shell to deflect explosions and a thick inner pressure hull that sealed life inside. It was said she could take a direct hit from a torpedo and keep fighting. In theory, she was unsinkable. In theory, inside, the design was brutal and efficient. Narrow corridors lined with valves, pipes, and painted numbers, every surface cold to the touch. Behind the watertight bulkheads, 11 compartments stacked with weapons, machinery, and men. There was no comfort here, only purpose. For the sailors of the Northern Fleet, that was enough. At the command center stood Captain Gennady Lyakin, 45 years old, quiet, meticulous, the kind of officer who knew every sound a submarine should make. To his crew, he was steady as the sea itself. He had spent more than half his life below the surface, and he believed the Kursk could outlast anything. He was not wrong about her strength, only about what could break it. Each man aboard the Kursk carried the same quiet pride. They served on a vessel that symbolized power in a country struggling to remember what power felt like. Russia in the year 2000 was broke, exhausted, humiliated, but the Kursk still shone like proof that the empire had not truly drowned. On that August morning, as the crew ran their final checks before the exercise, the mood was light. The torpedo crews prepared the training rounds. The engineers monitored the pressure. The sonar room hummed with faint echoes of distant ships. The sea outside was still, and inside, every man trusted the machine around him. But deep within the forward compartment, inside one aged torpedo tube, a small leak had begun to form. It was invisible, harmless, perhaps. A whisper of hydrogen peroxide seeping past a cracked seal. No one noticed, not yet. And in the silence of the Barents Sea, even the smallest whisper can become a roar. At dawn on August 12, 2000, the Northern Fleet's grand naval exercise reached its peak. 30 vessels formed a vast semicircle in the Barents Sea, destroyers, cruisers, and submarines, all waiting for a signal from the command ship Piotr Veliki. It was to be a proud display of coordination and strength, watched closely by military observers and the Russian press. The centerpiece of the show would be K-141 Kursk firing a pair of dummy torpedoes, a simple test of precision and timing. Below the surface, the Kursk moved into position. Her crew was relaxed. The first torpedo to be fired was a practice round, loaded with a training warhead. Nothing dangerous, only air and weight. The second, however, used a volatile propulsion system, high-test peroxide, or HDP. It was old Soviet technology, fast, powerful, but unstable. When stored too long or sealed poorly, the peroxide could leak and react violently with metal, creating oxygen and heat. Enough heat to turn a training drill into a death sentence. Inside the torpedo room, sailors moved with the calm rhythm of experience. They loaded the first weapon. The Kursk's control room confirmed readiness. Everything was routine. At 11:28 a.m., the first explosion tore through the submarine. It wasn't massive, not yet. It shook the bow, rattled the lights, and sent an acrid smoke through the forward compartments. For a few seconds, the crew believed they could contain it. Fire alarm sounded. Watertight doors were sealed, orders barked. But 135 seconds later, a second explosion erupted, one so violent it was recorded by seismographs in Norway and Finland. According to NORSA, the second blast registered at magnitude 3.5 on the Richter scale, and the interval between the two detonations was precisely 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The shockwave was equivalent to 3 tons of TNT, tearing open the bow and collapsing multiple compartments. The front of the Kursk disintegrated. Compartments 1 through 4 collapsed instantly. The submarine plummeted to the seafloor, where it slammed into the mud at 108 meters depth. On the surface, the Russian Navy heard and felt nothing. The Arctic Sea had already swallowed the sound. When the noise faded, only metal groans and dripping water remained. The Kursk lay broken on the seafloor, its bow crushed, its hull cracked, its once mighty reactor now silent. Of the 118 men aboard, most died in seconds. But 23, sealed behind heavy doors in the aft compartments, were still alive. They were trapped, and they knew it. The survivors gathered in the 9th compartment, a cramped space filled with tools, batteries, and darkness. They had no power, no light, and the air was growing thin. Some tried to use emergency oxygen generators, but as the chemicals reacted with seawater, they released toxic gas. Every decision now carried a cost. Lieutenant Dmitry Kolesnikov, aged 27, began to record the names of those still breathing. His handwriting was steady at first, then uneven. In one note, later found in his uniform, he wrote, "All of us from the 6th, 7th, and 8th compartments are here. We can't get out. The pressure is rising. None of us will leave this place alive." Hours passed. The temperature dropped close to freezing. The walls hissed and popped as water crept closer. Some men prayed. Some stared into the dark, waiting for the impossible sound of rescue. Then, faintly, came a knock, rhythmic, distant. Someone was hitting the outer hull. They knocked back. For a moment, hope flickered through the black water. Rescue was coming, or so they believed. But above them, The ships of the Northern Fleet still hadn't realized that anything was wrong. Hours turned into silence. On the surface, the Russian Navy waited for a scheduled report from the Kursk. None came. The command ship Pyotr Veliki tried to make contact. No response. Sonar pings echoed through the Barents Sea, but the ocean returned only emptiness. At first, the fleet assumed it was a communication glitch. Submarines often went silent during drills, and Kursk was considered indestructible. When no signal came after 6 hours, concern began to spread, quietly, without panic, as if saying it aloud might make it real. Finally, the fleet admitted something was wrong. They began to search. By nightfall, several ships had converged on the area where the Kursk was last seen. They deployed sonar buoys and rescue submersibles, but conditions were poor: choppy seas, cold currents, low visibility. Their submersibles were outdated and unreliable. One failed to launch, another returned with a broken cable. Still, the fleet insisted the situation was under control. Word reached Moscow by the next morning. The Ministry of Defense announced there had been minor technical difficulties. State television repeated the line. No mention of casualties, no hint of crisis. Western nations, having detected the underwater explosion through seismic data, immediately offered assistance. Britain, Norway, the United States, France, and Germany all proposed to send advanced rescue teams and deep-diving submarines within hours of the first blast. But Moscow refused. Foreign interference in our naval operation is unacceptable, a spokesman said. As The Guardian later observed, pride sank faster than the submarine. The Russian Navy finally accepted foreign help on August 16, 4 days after the Kursk went silent. By then, the men inside were already gone. The government assured the families that communication with the Kursk was ongoing. In truth, they hadn't heard a single sound from her since the morning of August 12. By the third day, the Northern Fleet still had not reached the wreck. Each hour wasted was another hour of air consumed in the 9th compartment. Somewhere below, men were still alive, waiting for a help that would never come. Above, Moscow slept. On the 4th day, the Russian Navy claimed to have heard rhythmic sounds from beneath the waves, a signal, they said, from trapped sailors inside the Kursk. State media rushed to broadcast the story. There are survivors. They are knocking from the inside. Families wept with hope. Cameras filmed wives clinging to televisions, listening for the promise of rescue. But years later, documents and testimonies revealed a darker truth. The knocks were not coming from within the submarine. They were made by divers outside it. Some were testing the hull for integrity. Others, according to later leaks, were instructed to create the illusion that the rescue was making progress. Officials feared public outrage if the truth came out, that the men inside were already dead, and had been 4 days. By the time foreign experts were finally allowed to assist, on the 5th day after the explosion, the window for survival had long closed. The British and Norwegian teams arrived with modern equipment, capable of reaching the Kursk within hours. When they finally opened the rear escape hatch, August 20th, the sea rushed out black and cold. Inside the 9th compartment, they found only stillness and bodies. Dmitry Kolesnikov's note was among them. It confirmed what everyone had feared. The men had survived the explosions, had waited, had written their names, and had died slowly, in darkness. The knocks from the deep were never theirs. They were echoes of shame, not of life. When the truth finally surfaced, it was already too late to save anyone. On August 20th, 8 days after the first explosion, British and Norwegian divers reached the wreck of the Kursk. Their submersibles descended through freezing, black water until the faint outline of the submarine appeared in the searchlights, a massive shadow resting on the seafloor, its bow crumpled like paper. They attached the rescue chamber and knocked 3 times on the hatch. No answer came back. After cutting through the rusted bolts, they opened the rear escape hatch. A wave of thick, oily seawater spilled out. Inside, bodies, tangled cables, fragments of burned equipment, No sign of movement, no pockets of air. The men inside had suffocated days earlier. It was a graveyard of steel. When the Norwegian divers surfaced, they radioed a single phrase that would later define the tragedy: all are dead. No survivors. The message was relayed to the Russian command ship. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, quietly, the line went silent. That same day, Russian state media finally admitted the disaster. President Putin, who had remained on vacation through the entire crisis, appeared on television to say, "They are gone." But they fought to the end. His words did not bring comfort. The tragedy reached its most human moment not in the Barents Sea, but on land. In the port town of Vidyevo, where the families of the sailors had been gathered, television cameras recorded a raw confrontation between grief and authority. Mothers, wives, and children demanded answers from naval officials. They had been told 4 days that the rescue was going well, that their sons were still alive, only to learn from the foreign press that all hope was gone. One mother shouted through tears, "You lied to us, they were alive, and you did nothing." In one infamous scene broadcast worldwide, a woman fainted while screaming at a government minister. A nurse rushed forward and injected her with a sedative on live television, silencing her mid-sentence. The image became symbolic, a nation drugging its own grief. The Guardian later wrote, "The mothers of Kursk spoke louder than any admiral or politician. Their pain was the only truth Russia could not censor." For the Russian public, the moment shattered the illusion of control. It was no longer a military tragedy. It was an indictment of a government that had chosen secrecy over life. In the port of Vidyevo, families of the sailors confronted officials. Mothers screamed, wives fainted, and the cameras caught one woman shouting through tears, "You killed my son." Security guards dragged her away. The footage was quickly cut from the broadcast. Across the world, outrage grew. Western governments that had offered help from day one watched in disbelief as Russia blamed faulty equipment, unfavorable conditions, and even foreign submarines, anything but themselves. A year later, in 2001, a massive recovery operation began. Using cranes and pontoons, the entire hull of the Kursk was lifted from the seabed and brought to port, a broken monument to human arrogance. The front section, where the explosion occurred, had been cut away and left on the ocean floor, too dangerous, they said, to secret. Inside the recovered compartments, investigators found the remains of the 118 men. Most had died instantly, but in the last compartment, the 9th, traces of candle soot and oxygen cartridges confirmed what the world already knew. Some had survived 4 hours, maybe even a day or two, before the air turned to poison. Next to Kolesnikov's note were scrawled words from another sailor. "It's getting dark here. Too dark to see." In the years that followed, Russia promised reform, new rescue systems, modernized submarines, better communication. But none of that changed what the Kursk had revealed: a navy trapped in denial, a system that valued silence over lives. The official investigation concluded that the disaster was caused by a faulty torpedo, corroded fuel lines, and neglected safety protocols. The government's own commission, led by Deputy Prime Minister Ilya Klebanov, later confirmed that a leak of high-test peroxide in a 65 to 76A torpedo caused the chain of explosions. A fact independently supported by NRPA and NORSA reports. No one was punished. No admiral lost his rank. The families received medals, money, and explanations that meant nothing. Today, at the Naval Cemetery in Murmansk, a black granite monument bears 118 names. At its base, a simple inscription: "They knocked from below. The Kursk lies silent again, beneath a sea that remembers everything, the pride, the lies, the wasted hours. The submarine that knocked back before dying."